I'm going to start the recording. I don't want to squash it. Chini is facilitator today, so I'll hand it off to him. But this is a good conversation, so feel free to keep chatting about it. And we can also do announcements at some point too.
Nice to see everyone. It's been a while for me. I thought we could, start with announcements. I feel like everyone knows each other. So if you wanted to introduce yourself in the chat, you can. But I was thinking we could just go straight into announcements. And then our topic is storytelling. So Frank, why don't you go ahead?
So the U.S. Global Change Research Program, sorry for the barking dog, has officially begun the process of the Climate Literacy Guide 2023 is going to happen. It's going to be a lot different than what it was in 2009. The only way that works is if everybody participates in pushing it to be something other. It is a federal process. It gets through a whole lot of review, but the listening sessions and the request for information through an FRN federal process will be going out soon, and the listening sessions will happen in March, April, and May. Writing will happen after that, then review and subsequent and all that. But so just pay attention, participate, get as many people in there to push this as hard into whatever you think it needs to be, and expect a lot more information coming soon.
Colleen, why don't you go ahead?
Not nearly as exciting, but I am going to be in Colorado in May for KidWin the national competition. So, if anyone wants to drop by Boulder for the national competition, I'll be hanging out there, helping out and judging. And just because I really like the folks at KidWin, they're also doing the Recharge Academy in New Jersey. And so focusing on offshore wind. So if you know some New Jersey teachers, they got a bunch of funding to help support New Jersey teachers, but they also often have funding for other teachers to go. It's a little far for us Alaska teachers. I'm hoping in a year, year and a half, we'll be able to host one in Alaska as well, but not going to make it happen this year. So, but Recharge Academy, spread the word. It's really fun. I've gone before, and it's a great experience.
Gina?
Sorry, issues unmuting myself. We have another King webinar happening tomorrow at 6 Eastern, 4 Mountain, with Karen Kirk, who is a science writer. And she does a fabulous job talking about different strategies for inspiring hope and human resources and that type of thing. So feel free to share that. And we're continuing through the Queen series, so I'll keep mentioning the webinars, but that one is tomorrow at 6 Eastern, 4 Mountain.
Any other announcements before we start? All right, so, hi, Emily, good timing. So the topic of today is storytelling. For what it's worth, this just helped me kind of organize my thoughts a little bit. I thought we could just take 30 seconds or a minute to think about some either possible topics underneath storytelling or some guiding questions. You could either put it in the chat or you could add it to this Padlet if you wanted to. I'll put the link in the chat. It's kind of where I'll be keeping track of things. I'm interested in thinking about what moves are effective for storytellers, if you have examples. And I invited Emily yesterday because she really helped me think about storytelling, not just as a personal thing, which is important, but also kind of as a collective process of kind of examples for change, and helping communities kind of document their story of as they go through change. And she talks a lot about positive deviance. Emily, if you could, eventually I want you to weigh in, but like thinking about groups of people, especially ordinary groups of people doing extraordinary things and telling their stories. So if you wanted to just use the Padlet or use the chat of thinking about kind of topics or questions that you have, and then we can just, if you want to, I think just raise your hand if you want to weigh in. And yeah, that's it.
I'll just say that's a really cool tool. I'll just say, I was just going to say that Padlet looks like a really cool tool. I've never used it before.
It's so good. It's so good for like organizing just all the different stuff. You might, yeah, it's, I'm kind of very dependent on Padlets for organizing my life. Jim?
Yes, so just throwing these in, some comments on things. One, definitely have noticed, not just in climate, but in STEM and many things, quite a lot of discussion of storytelling. So it's a timely topic. I mean, I'm seeing that nonprofits like hiring a person who's the official storyteller, or to see that happen. I'm sure in history that's happened before, but that's new to me. So a lot of discussion of it. And I think it's just recognizing there's a little bit of discussing what is storytelling? What are characteristics of it? There are classic things that we say are storytelling, but there's variation. And I'm just reflecting on this as I started to hear about it and being asked to tell stories, our program being asked to tell stories, I tried to clarify in my mind a bit, okay, so there's storytelling. What is not storytelling, right? I mean, there's a thing of recognizing that there's other forms of communication. What are they when they're appropriate? Because storytelling isn't always the best way to do things, but to do it. And the place that I think that I most had to get to know storytelling, well, in a few places, of when the STEM for All Video Showcase, the national showcase federally, they would have webinars saying, if you make a video that's a story and good storytelling, it's going to be popular and it's be good. But the vast majority of the videos on STEM for All Video Showcase are not really stories. They're more the classic form that we use, which is more reporting. We're describing our program. We're saying what we're doing. We're doing things. That's not quite, I mean, that's not what they were getting at when they're saying doing storytelling. But I certainly would say that there are times when storytelling is much more effective, especially because so many forms of communication, you want to elicit emotion. You want to get people involved. You don't want to just be reporting facts to them. I'm not saying anything new, but just a little bit of maybe a little beginning analytical on, we shouldn't assume that we all are talking about the same thing when we say storytelling, for instance. So that's it. Thank you.
Emily, I was hoping I could call on you to give us, you really helped kind of widen my lens for what storytelling can and should be when we're talking about climate action, from like the kind of individual to the collective. And you talked about positive deviance. I mean, you work in entertainment education. Would you mind giving a little bit of kind of just framing for the way you think about storytelling?
Sure. So there are lots of levels and lots of ways that storytelling exists in our lives. You know, everything from your internal monologue that you tell yourself every day and how you perceive your world, to the stories we tell each other over the dinner table, to, you know, sort of mass media. And I'm going to mostly focus on the mass media for, you know, the sake of this conversation, but there's really a lot of ways to do that. As you said, there's a lot of nonprofits who are experimenting in this space. There are journalism teams that are exploring. I think my favorite one right now is called Solutions Journalism Network. And they've got sort of their own sort of philosophical approach to how you frame stories so that you're supporting agency, you're helping people find the solutions that they can participate in to engage with the topic in their own communities. We don't really have a great systemization. And then the entertainment education is much larger programs. I mean, it's so I'm gonna put some links in the chat. I was just looking around for them. Helen and Sarucci and Amy had a paper come out just this week. So this is actually a really good time for this, with sort of a definition of what entertainment education storytelling is or could be. And so I put that as a reference in the chat, but just sort of as an overview, the storytelling is really like the tip of an iceberg of a larger communications strategy. And so they're very intentionally done stories that are supporting both the visual representation of positive outliers. I'm going to back up for about positive outliers, since you flagged that one, Cheney. So for any population where something that you want to see behavioral change and things are not particularly going well, there's usually a handful of people who are already doing behaviors that will support the positive action. Now, these get used in public health interventions all the time, using vaccination and hygiene and reproductive health and nutrition campaigns. It's not really used yet for climate change. And so I think that's part of what I've really been trying to work at for the last, half dozen years or so, is trying to improve the methodologies that we have accessible and to try to launch some of it. So I think one of the things that's challenging about climate is that it's not one behavioral intervention. It's not like brush your teeth and your teeth are healthy, right? It's really a lot of different things in a lot of different places. Electrification and building insulation looks very different in Chicago versus Los Angeles, right? And so you're looking at different sets of behaviors. And so I've kind of backed it up even further from that to look sort of geospatially at what's happening in which communities and how do you identify what are the positive outliers, what are the succeeding programs for each community for climate adaptation and mitigation interventions. And then, hypothetically, those can be fed through complex campaigns. The multimedia campaigns, the metaphor we've been using so far is Star Wars. So like Star Wars started off as like a series of 3 movies, and then it expanded to, books and merchandising. And now there's like all these different sub stories, and they all interweave. So that word is transmedia. And so for US audiences, transmedia campaigns have the possibility of expanding the scope and scale that we're doing storytelling at. I see Deb's hand raised. I'm going to pause here.
Hi, thank you. I didn't want you to pause. I was going to ask you the question after.
Emily, why don't you wrap up what you're saying, and then we'll go to Eric, and then we'll go to Deb for a question.
Okay,
Keep
got
going.
it. So I think that there's real possibilities for how we use existing entertainment education methods for population level behavioral interventions, both at the individual and collective layer, because some of the behavioral interventions are individual things that you do, like participating in active public transit, but some of them are also civic level engagement. So even at some level, we can talk about civic engagement and collective level change through individual behaviors. And when I wrote a prototype for this, we flagged, like 24 different behaviors, and we interwove them all in stories. And so when we talk about storytelling for climate, I feel like there's like a diaspora of different approaches, and mine is just one of them. I've heard a couple of other, like the Sander Van Linden team is talking about inoculation, just making sure there's lots of accurate, correct information available in advance of, misinformation. I've heard, lots of different approaches, but I think that the entertainment education approach that's been used for public health interventions in the past is available, but not yet implemented. And I think that it would improve the rate of change of the various behavioral interventions that we would like to be working on collectively.
Eric, why don't you go next? I know you do a lot of like video storytelling and yeah.
Thanks, Cheney. And yeah, just sort of thinking about what you're sharing and thinking about the climate story too. Part of the inspiration for me getting into the space and wanting to kind of, I guess, engage with it as my career, environmental education, was in the 90s, late 80s and early 90s, when Al Gore was raising attention about ozone depletion. And it was, there was the Montreal Protocol and things got put in place. And that, in a way, that's a simpler story because there were a set amount of chemicals that the CFCs, and then transitioning to HCFCs, and then ultimately moving away. The story there is that the ozone layer is healing, but it's got decades to fully heal. The climate story is more complex, but there's entry points, like you're saying, Emily, at so many levels. So that the good news is, like, if we can create the positive, focus on these positive outliers, focus on these behaviors, there's so many entry points and so many things to celebrate, and so many people doing those things. And yet, yeah, there's smaller fraction of overall population. But then, like, the larger context of the climate story is, we're talking about generations of effort that are going to get us to the place we want to be, even a larger timeline than the ozone story. And the ozone story potentially has an end in its healing if there's not some kind of feedbacks that cause it to start kind of degrading again in some way. So I think that's hard for people to get, that they're looking for the magic bullets, right? The one thing that's going to solve this, and then everything's going to be better. Weather's going to go back to normal and great. But that's not the thing, right? That's not going to happen, as we know, in the coming decades, even the coming centuries. We're in this process of change, and yet that shouldn't leave us all feeling helpless. And because, again, there's so many entry points. Unlike ozone depletion, you could just say to those industries, stop, and if we get the international agreement, it took some time to do that. But with this one, it's just a bigger, much more complex thing.
I think that there's systemizations that we could use to make it seem less big. By the time you're using GIS to flag behavioral interventions at a community level, it basically becomes a passive database that is a reference. They both allow the community to provide their own visual examples and links to what the doable resources are within the community. Like, I don't know which installers are putting in heat pumps in my neighborhood, right? But like, if you had that as a database, that would be a much more specific ask. And I think that's one of the things that the entertainment education people have found over the years, is that the specificity and the doability of the tasks really, and the interlinking of those pieces, is a critical part of what the entertainment education behavioral intervention strategy changes are. And I think that they can be used. I think we could set it up as a database. And I've talked with several of the television film production companies, and like, if we had that available to them, they would be able to use it as a passive resource. We're not going to be able to get creative control for American audiences the way that they've done it in the global South. There are different ways that the media industries are working. And I think my colleagues and I have had some fairly in-depth conversations about the mechanics of that. But the last dozen conversations I've had about this with colleagues, I think that if we built it on the science communication side, it would be useful as a resource, regardless of who's doing the storytelling production. The nonprofits could have it as a resource. The commercial teams could have it as a resource. The journalism teams could be interlinked with it. I think it's more a mechanical, like, timing belt than it is a conceptual, where's my heart at kind of storytelling thing, because then you can start to actually see what's happening in each community. And I think as a researcher, it's kind of interesting to see where the gaps and analyses are. So when I ran it in my own community as the first prototype, what I noticed is that there were no electrification stories. That was a really big gap to me, because we're an engaged community with tons of climate activism, and the group here is called 3CE, but the Central Coast of California is actively electrifying everything, and none of those stories were represented in what climate solutions looked like to the community's perceptions. And so then I think at that level we can really get into some of the structural barriers for improving storytelling functionally. It's not some of what storytelling is sometimes it's like, well, how did that make you feel? Like, I think that there's some low-hanging fruit for how we represent issues. So part of the narrative, this is so big, we can't handle this, is like, that just builds anxiety. It doesn't really get us to agency. And so helping break that down so things are more concrete and clear and people have multiple entry points, I think would improve that. Actually, so I'll drop another paper in the link that bringing up eco-anxiety. So I had a paper come out this week connecting the eco-anxiety issues to sort of the science communication, climate communication, behavioral intervention pieces. So I'll put that in the chat now, but okay, I see lots of hands. We're going to go to Deb next.
Emily, thank you. I think your presentation was so in-depth and rich that it inspired many questions and inspiration. I'm going to ask you later on about models of communication strategies, and I'll give you a few examples. So Scholastic would interview a kid who's doing something, and that's wonderful. But my question for you, especially because I think I did a quick research, you may have a psychology background as well, is how to, I'll give you an example of a few stories that some are more positive than others. And so how do you present the few first steps as going, oh, that's great. You're wrong on you're not wrong on 9 parts, and that isn't quite it, but that's great that you want to plant trees. How do we, and how to frame that story to both amplify the good parts, but still leave room for step 2 and step 3 would be. And I can give specific examples, but in general, how would do you have a framework for promoting not just, the great, amazing ones? Oh, teenager wants more climate change in his school, runs for board of elections in Boise, Idaho, wins, which is wonderful. That's great, but that's also a really high bar for anybody to accomplish versus, oh, kids want, understand trees are important for breathing. And so they're going to go to their taekwondo place and raise so much money to plant seedlings far away. And so we all know from, just biomass, that many seedlings versus so much money versus how effective this organization is it's a right step, but it's not all the way. So I'm curious how you would approach the different levels of steps, the different levels of stories, and promote the good parts and amplify the parts that need to be.
Those are really great questions. I think those come down to sort of more editorial decisions. So the GIS interface that I've sort of referenced, I'll try to, when I'm not actively listening, I'll try to find a link for it and put it in the chat. But I think that it helps you identify what they are regionally, and then they're searchable, right? So we have it broken down both by place and by topic at this point. And then it makes those editorial decisions quicker and easier, because instead of grabbing, oh crap, well, I've got to do something on climate. What can I grab quickly? Who's available? You can make more thoughtful choices from a larger pool, right? That's sort of one level of intervention. And then the, Solutions Journalism Network, again, sort of with the sort of mapping elements, they are collecting what they think are good examples and starting to database them. And I want to say starting, right? I feel like it's really like the tip of a beginning of a project. It's not well developed and fleshed out yet, but they are working at it. And I would encourage, they have a new climate storytelling training program, but they were training like 10 journalists at a time. By scale, it's just insufficient. And so again, if we're looking at positive outliers, I can identify who's doing stuff in the US where we have leverage, where we could build on those programs. But and you could cross-link the solutions journalism program with some of the Climate Central kinds of journalism programs. But that work hasn't been done yet. And so I think we do have a lot of room for growth with things that are prototyped enough to show that they do work, that they are existing in the communities, but just not scaled to the degree that we would need them to be effective. I think that those are all really good points, Deb, and thank you for bringing them up.
Frank, why don't you go next?
All right, Emily, nice to see you. It's been a little bit of time.
Nice to see you, Frank.
It's not going to surprise you, this question. Given the climate and global change enterprise has pretty much taken a expert approach to science, outreach, communication, media. You have scientists doing the work. The fossil fuel companies and think tanks who don't want progress on climate change use marketing companies who understand all of what you just said deeply. And, I was just looking for literature about why did the forces that don't want climate change progress to occur go to the public, and the forces that want to do the science go to the expert, the decision maker, and they left the public open, so that and there's a schism in methodology at the full implementation. It's a worldview problem. And so my question to you in the chat was, why don't we fund this? It's not like we don't know the research. It's not like these enterprises don't exist. And it's not like we don't know it's important to do, but all the interventions we've used are not using the best practices. And those who actually don't want this to happen, Michael Mann's book is very clear on this point, the delay strategy. And even the denial strategy before that had a very media-heavy public approach, very sophisticated. What's his name? He was at Drexel. I don't know if he's still there, doing all the documenting. Starts with a B, documenting the delay. Billions of dollars have been poured into the delay. So why is it that one worldview goes and uses these strategies for harm, and the ones that want to not cause the harm don't value these strategies? If we don't come to the answer on that one, the why we're not at scale is we're never going to get there.
I think that those are all really good points, Frank. I think this is something that has been a bottleneck for me in my work for several years. I'm actively interested in trying to improve it. In fact, I think I sent a few people to your desk who were poking at similar related issues. I think one of them was training the people who are, granting money to help train them so that they would have a better approach to who they were giving money to and why. There have been a couple of journalists come across my desk, trying to figure this out and trying to, interested in looking at sort of the larger, more systematic approaches that you were talking about last time we met for ASILs. So I've been, redirecting basically back to you, saying, hey, look, here's the team who's looking at sort of the larger systematic climate education work. This is one piece of all of that. I can tell you that I spent about 4 months this year on a World Health Organization team trying to expand exactly this, but on a global level. And we hit capacity barriers really fast. I was on a joint like World Health Organization, UNEP, and then it was one of the big climate teams all sort of working together. And it was like running a marathon, like 1, 2, 3, like we couldn't, there was so much to do and such limited resources. We couldn't get effectively to the thing we wanted to bureaucratically quickly, even with, a handful of experts sitting there saying, hey, we could have this up in a week. Right. So I'm not trying, I am trying, but I don't think we've gotten there yet. And, I had sort of high hopes. I still sort of do that, there are some things that we can continue to put together. But I think that the scale that I'm thinking would benefit from more stable support. It's not something that you're going to get done in a month. It's something that would be infrastructure built that would support all of the teams for at least a year or two.
But Emily, I'm sorry, just a quick redirect, if that's okay. Yeah. I am with you. The problem I see is the people, National Science Foundation, right? One of the biggest funders in this, they're not going to fund this.
I know, I've tried.
Right. Bloomberg, you would think Bloomberg would fund this. Nope. People have asked him over and over and over and over again to fund this kind of stuff.
I know.
There is a structural worldview schism here where the people who they go, oh, we'll get the policies that go to the decision maker, and they forget the people. There's a expertise to decision maker worldview, and then there's a, more the business model goes to the people, because they know public opinion actually carries a lot of weight in this work. Mm-hmm. Why does the one worldview not value the public being effectively engaged? Because that's when story comes right in. I don't know the answer to this. We haven't found it, but it's a stubborn thing. It's not like we haven't tried. And I know people who are really smart who've tried this and they cannot get traction.
Yet, I feel like in the time that I've been doing this, we are making change, but again, it's a race, right? So I'm not content with the pace that we're working at. I think that, every time we have another publication come out, like I remember when I started on climate change communication, there wasn't enough, like medical papers saying that it was public health intervention. I was basically laughed out of the room, right? That this was a public health issue. And, over 5 years, some of the teams have done such an exceptional job building, academic documentation saying that it's undisputably a public health issue, that we can go in more strongly with that now. So I think that, we are making some progress, but again, given the rate that we have to make change at, it's insufficient. And I'm definitely with you in anything we can make it to go faster.
Let's go to Jim, and then I'm maybe going to try to shift it towards like maybe some more like personal storytelling in the classroom, thinking about kids, thinking about teachers, and thinking about ways that we can do that as witnesses to like share our grief and our hope. Jim, go ahead.
So Janie, that's exactly what I'll want to talk about as often, and I'm not kissing up to you, Frank, but you bring up really important things, and I just want to kind of run with that or amplify it or expand that a little bit. Those of us have been around for a long time, which is most of us. I certainly would say from year 2000 to 2012, I would constantly have discussions of people in the climate world who would say that education is not important. It would say all the time, you're spending all your time on people under 22. That's not important. We don't have the time to reach young people. We have to work to the people who are 35, 40, 50, and 60, and we have to go to the Congress, and that's where we have to go. And then, by the way, you'd always point out like 20 years later, like, yeah, the people we were reaching are the ones you want now. You got to kind of think forward and the whole thing. But the main one I would bring up is along the line of, you don't think that education is important? Let's take a look what Chevron's doing. Let's take a look what Shell is doing. Look at the American Petroleum Industry. And I will point out to you what they're doing in education. They think it's important. Why don't we? They think it's really important to get in, do the curriculum and do that. That's a long time thing. So Frank, I just maybe what I'm trying to say is what you're saying is so right on. What we saw in marketing and what we saw in film and everything and TV, it's exactly what was going on in education at the same time. We're basically leaving the kids to the petrochemical industry. I can have an uplifting thing, but I want to get more to the Cheney stuff a little bit. I don't know how when we look at how we make our film, our stories and what media we use, I know we don't want to be stuck at using all of the main models, but I think there's a lot to learn from those main models, and they're a good reference point. So the way that Hollywood makes movies and films, the different roles that are played and what you have to do. You need casting, you need characters, you need actors, you need plot, you need emotion, you need the events that you're going to go out, you need music, you need filmmakers, videography, director of photography, you need assistant directors, or at least you need a condensed down or many people playing those same roles. I mean, I think there's a lot to that when we're actually doing it. That's what I'm finding. And fortunately at Lowell School, where I'm one of the mentors in Climate Club and Do It, our approach is that we have the ability to blend those things together, as we do not separate them into silos already. So we have STEM and language arts and humanities and visual arts and performing arts all able to talk to each other, all with a very strong emphasis on climate change. So we can we can pull those things together and actually put together the whole deal. In Climate Club, the elective that deals with it, we have people who are the presenters. We have people, or people can be mentally ill, but there's the presenters, there's the writers, there's the videographers, there's the, all the roles in Hollywood at least are somewhat addressed, because we need to do that to produce our good stories. And so that's one school at least, and I'm sure there's more. And I'm always trying to just seed the discussion and recognize that in schools and with kids, this stuff is really going on. And it's not a matter of having people come and just work with the kids at Lowell or the alumni at Lowell, but you're going to need some good actors. And it helps if you have some people who, when you tell your story, these people really are living this story. They're not actors. They're actors. They know how to act. They know how to make it emotional. They know how to deliver their lines like scientists usually can't. But they actually live this story. They actually are doing these things. And taking electrification or the various versions that happen. Anyway, maybe what I'm trying to say is, one is that it can happen in the schools, and I think it should, and it's exciting, and young people love it. Okay. Two, I would say also the multi-generational approach. We should not be asking students to figure it all out for themselves and forget what we've learned for the last thousands of years about storytelling, or 100 years, or whatever it's been for Hollywood, 120 years, right? I really get pissed at when people go to the extreme and we're going to put the kids in a room and tell them they have to figure it all out. We're not going to give them any mentors. They're supposed to do it. We're not going to give them the video equipment. They're going to have to do their editing, which, by the way, is a real roadblock in video. Kids are better at being actors and storytellers and things. Video editing is a big learning curve, right? Some will learn it, but if you're going to make video editing that young people cannot participate in making a movie until they have somebody who does editing, it's not going to happen. It's just, editing is tough. Music, there can be music that they compose, but a lot of times you want to use music that you can get licensed, because music is so important and so done. But anyway, I guess, Cheney, I want to offer that you've got at least one school, and I'm just doing it again to make it clear that this is not aspirational, like maybe someday there'll be schools. I'm sure there's more. Once you bring forward one example, more say, well, we do it too. That's what I want to hear, right? But you've got one school that's with you, okay? We're doing it, and we don't mean to do it alone, okay? Thanks.
So I'd love to get other people in the conversation. So I'm thinking, I would love to hear about, stories about, how are you getting kids to tell stories, either about to show or process grief, to think about hope, to envision a better future? Are there things that have been successful either with teachers or with classrooms? Are there resources out there that are kind of help collecting those stories and make them public? So I would love to get a few other people who maybe haven't spoken up yet to get a little bit involved. We have about 14 more minutes. Whose stories are being told? Yeah, Ingrid, go ahead.
I'll speak up. We've done a project at our summer camp at the Cayuga Nature Center that was inspired by a larger project going on in our community called 1,000 Conversations. And it was trying to get people to talk about climate change and what we could do about it. And there was a prompt to imagine yourself in the future. Let's say it was 2030 or 2035. And things had gotten better in your community. It could be an environmental focus, climate change, or it could be thinking about social justice issues, however you wanted to think about it. And then just asking people to describe what did your community look like, and then how did we get here? So we did this with kids, had them imagine a future, and they drew some pictures, and then we captured audio of their descriptions of their pictures, and it was really eye-opening and very. Kids, this is what kids excel at, right? Using their imagination. but just really heartwarming to think about the things they thought about. Some of them focused on nature and animals, some of them focused on ending racism. And these were kids at ages, I would say 6 to 9 for the most part. So that was a good prompt to get them to imagine a future and then think about what does it look like and how did we get there?
Yeah, I put this in the Padlet. Grist put out, this is more for older students, like probably high school and college, but like a bunch of just authors kind of telling climate fiction, but like kind of a more positive, hopeful vision of the future, and that kind of storytelling away from like kind of this dystopic literature that we're often seeing that kids are obsessed with, but figuring out ways to help kids tell positive stories about the future seem really important. Ginger, why don't you go ahead and then Frank.
So try to remember to save the chat, people, and then scroll back up. I posted a really cool story called Leesburg, Welcome to Leesburg or something. That's climate fiction, but it's actually about managed resettlement, like a community that plans for accepting climate refugees. And it's a pretty cool story. So I like that.
Will you put that in the chat? Oh, I found it. I got
it.
I'm gonna put it in the Padlet.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. The other thing, I really wonder if we could find a collaborative funding source. Like if we could get the big environmental groups like Sierra, NRDC, EDF, Union of Concerned Scientists, if they pooled their money for PSAs or advertising or things like that, maybe we could get ads, not during the Super Bowl, certainly, but maybe there could at least be ads or, web ads or things like that demonstrated the kind of things we're talking about. I don't know if you guys noticed those He Gets Us ads, which are really interesting because they promote Christianity and Jesus, but then there's this weird backstory that it's actually they're funded by pretty far right, not very welcoming people. But I mean, it would be interesting to see like compiling, if we could get these organizations to compile their money.
Frank, and then Emily.
I'm sorry, somebody can go ahead. I've got a phone call coming in.
Oh. Emily, why don't you jump in and then Frank after?
Okay, so I like the idea of the positive framings. I'm going to strongly agree with that. I'm also going to editorially bring it back to the present, because I feel like each next step is critical. And so jumping ahead to a hypothetical solved future doesn't help us improve the visualization of how we get through each of these steps, because we don't know what's going to happen yet. And so setting the stories in the present day, improving the visualization of what's happening now, those positive outliers, what are communities doing to improve mitigation and adaptation in each of their cases now, and then building them together so that you have more of them collectively. And I agree with I agree that the production quality is one of the the skill with which you tell the story is a consideration. But I think mechanically there's many ways to do that. I'm going to focus on the content, the intellectual content. And I wouldn't put it on focusing on processing grief. The paper that I put in about eco-anxiety before, I think we have, reasonably strong evidence showing that participating with agency in your community is the best way to deal with the eco-anxiety. So, I was seeing too many, one of the reasons that I worked on this particular project was I was seeing too many projects saying, you need more self-empathy for that grief and sit alone by yourself and do yoga. No, get out in your community, start participating. And so helping people do that and build community, the social emotional support of participation with agency in climate mitigation and adaptation now is where I would put the emphasis for training new people to do climate storytelling.
Makes a lot of sense. Frank, you have your call. You want to?
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, two things. The first thing is one thing, and I'm going to sort of build off what Emily was just talking about here. The first thing is one time during a regional Quaker meeting, we had arranged a sort of exercise in terms of what would you want the world to look like, and the theme for that particular regional meeting was climate issues. And one thing I experienced if there is no scaffolding, is that there were a lot of folks who got into very almost surrealistic fantasy, like flying buses and jetpacks and stuff of that sort. And really feel like what's important is that you've got to have that scaffolding to help folks develop realistic visions of the future. Otherwise than that, they're setting themselves up for disappointment. And the one other thing I'll make mention of here is I'm working on version 3 of the Climate Toolkit, the manual that I've got is an open source document. And one of the things that's in there is I'm looking at revising that document. So the last activity in there that involves climate resilient communities is one that's more in line with the activity I oftentimes have students do in class. In fact, they're in the midst of it doing right now, which is essentially to use Google Projects to create a fly through of communities having climate action plans. And there's a lot of advantages, like you can have examples of the interventions and the impacts by actually flying to those places and developing text along with it. But to get to that place, one of the things that I have them do is we work through a whole series of other tools, climate impact maps and things of that sort. So I think it's really critical that as we're having people develop their stories, that we make sure they've got something that helps them develop those stories in realistic ways so they don't get disappointed.
That makes sense. Frank, will you drop a link to that version 3 if you said it's open source? Could you drop that?
Yeah, it's in version 2. I'm working on version 3.
Will you put version 2 in the chat?
Yeah, I can do that. I got it. It'll take me just a couple of minutes.
Okay, great. All right, Colleen, go ahead, and then Ginger.
So I don't know that I have a full coherent thought, but a lot of this stuff is just sparking really cool ideas that I'm thinking about. Like, I remember I did a science and storytelling camp when I was in high school, like 20 years ago or however many years ago that was. And it was so cool. And it's just like, oh, I haven't heard of them still doing that here. Like, how, why is that not still happening? And how can we make that happen again? And I shared in the chat the Just Transition Alaska. They're starting this new zine, like featuring stories and art from youth around the just transition. And I just want to note that I'm really glad that people are talking about this, because storytelling is a very Indigenous way of thinking about our work. And so being able to highlight that and using it in this way and highlighting those stories of, non-traditional or different voices that we haven't been hearing a lot in the environmental movement is really great. So appreciate all that you guys are doing. Turn over to Ginger.
Thanks. That's a cool idea. The science story camp. So I really want to reiterate Frank's comment about providing some kind of scaffolding or guidance. We had an interesting, the Citizens Climate Lobby sponsored a climate concert in my area. And it was called Alaska Suite, and it was like a multimedia with photographs and had, you know, pictures of starving polar bears and things like that. There were beautiful pictures too, but they did have like, you know, but there's hope, we can still do stuff. And so they asked the audience to like, they passed out paper and pencils and what can you do or are you doing to, you know, fight climate change. And like predominantly white audience, predominantly upper middle class audience, 75% of the answers were, I have or am buying an electric car. You know, like consumption, they're going to consume their way out of this problem. And just the level of disconnect. And my friend was like, we need to stop buying cars and build safe, walkable streets and neighborhoods. You know, I have a clothesline, you know, that's what I'm doing. So like setting boundaries that push people to think a little more deeply and a little more like trying to move past the you know, even in the thread we talked about the promoting the EVs but they're still giant trucks. They're still giant death machines because they weigh a ton and will kill people if they hit them in an intersection, you know. So anyway, just editorializing.
All right, we're going to wrap up. Emily, why don't you have just final thoughts? I'm going to put the Padlet in the chat, which was updated with as many resources as I could do. So Emily, why don't you close us out?
Okay, so Ginger, thanks for bringing up all those points. I completely agree with you. I think that we should be providing, from the science communication side, I think one of the things that we can improve is providing those regional answers. So here are the things that you do in your community, and then not just listing them, but providing images and stories and examples of what they look like at that specific community regional level, not like 3 communities over, not halfway around the world, the specificity, right? And I think that's doable now. And if there was like one thing that I could change, that would be it for this moment. Thank you, Cheney, for gathering everybody to talk about this today.
Yeah, it was fun. Frank, I know people should go. We want to respect your time. Frank, do you have one more thing you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw something in for Colleen's benefit. I'm going to hold this up to the phone and hopefully you can see it. That's on the tower on my garage. So I put that up there because you've been talking about Kidwind. Brand.
All right. Bye, everyone. It was really nice to see everyone's face. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for moderating, Jenny. Great discussion.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. I always learn so much when I participate. This is just amazing. Thank you.
Hi, folks. Happy Valentine's Day.
Bye.